The hum of the Odyssey 7's life support systems was a constant companion to Dr. Mara Solis as she moved through the dimly lit corridors of the colony ship. 50 years into their journey to Eden 3, the massive vessel carried 10,000 colonists in cryosleep, humanity's best hope for a fresh start on a distant world. But Mara was awake, alone among the sleeping travelers, prematurely roused by a propulsion system malfunction that the ship's AI had deemed worthy of human intervention. That had been 3 weeks ago. The issue was resolved, but the ship's protocols prevented her return to cryosleep until certain system checks were completed, a process that would take another month. So she wandered the sterile hallways, a solitary ghost drifting between chambers of dreamless sleepers. The viewing deck offered the best perspective of their journey. Mara stood before the reinforced viewport, staring out at the distant stars. Her reflection stared back, dark circles under her eyes, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, lab coat hanging loosely on her thin frame. As the ship's lead biologist, she was responsible for the genetic samples that would help establish the first Earth colonies on Eden 3, a planet deemed hospitable after decades of robotic exploration. "Status report. Odyssey," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "All systems nominal. Dr. Solis." The ship's AI responded, its feminine voice calibrated to be soothing. "Cryopods functioning at 99.8% efficiency. Estimated arrival at Eden 3 in 394 days. Mara nodded. Nearly perfect, as always. The ship was a marvel of engineering, designed to sustain its precious human cargo through the half-century journey across the stars. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Until it wasn't. It began as a routine check of the genomic testing systems, equipment that would be crucial once they reached Eden 3. The testing chambers needed to be prepared for analyzing the compatibility of Earth organisms with Eden 3's biochemistry. Mara initiated the standard diagnostic sequence, expecting the green confirmation lights that had greeted her every other time. Instead, a red warning flashed on the terminal screen. "Anomaly detected. Unregistered biological material present in testing chamber 3. Mara's heart rate quickened. This was impossible. The chambers had been sterilized and sealed before departure. Nothing should be growing there. She donned a containment suit and entered the lab. The airlock hissing closed behind her. The testing chambers were self-contained units, each holding different genomic sequencing equipment. Chamber 3 specialized in rapid mutation analysis, technology that would help determine how Earth organisms might evolve in the new environment. Through the chamber's transparent wall, everything looked normal. Mara accessed the internal cameras and microscopic imaging systems. What she saw on the screen made her blood run cold. Colonies of bacteria, definitely not part of the approved biological manifest, were thriving in the nutrient gel of the testing plates. Their structure was unlike anything in the ship's database. They appeared to be manipulating the genetic material in the test samples, incorporating foreign DNA and then mutating at an accelerated rate. "Odyssey, when was the last access to testing chamber 3? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Testing chamber 3 was last accessed 47 years, 3 months, and 17 days ago, during final preparations before departure." The AI replied, "That made no sense. These bacteria couldn't have been dormant for so long. They must have been introduced after the ship departed Earth. But how, and by whom?" Mara spent the next 48 hours in the lab, running tests, taking samples, analyzing the bacteria's structure and behavior. Sleep was a distant memory as she worked, fueled by stimulants from the medical bay and the growing sense of dread in her stomach. The results were worse than she had feared. The bacteria, which she had named X-Eden for lack of a better term, seemed designed to integrate with and modify genetic material. In the test cultures, it had caused catastrophic cellular breakdown after several generations. If it were to infect the colonists, Mara's mind raced through the implications. Protocol dictated that any potentially harmful biological contamination be reported immediately to the command structure. In normal circumstances, that would mean waking the captain and medical officer. But these weren't normal circumstances. If she reported this now, the entire mission could be aborted. 10,000 colonists would be awakened decades from Earth, with no way back and potentially no safe way forward. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. But if she kept silent and tried to solve this herself, she risked the lives of everyone aboard if she failed. The weight of 10,000 lives pressed down on her shoulders as she stared at the microscopic enemy swimming on her screen. "Odyssey," she said finally. "Seal testing chamber 3 under my authority. Access restricted to my biometrics only. Classification level, Omega. Warning, Omega classification requires captain's authorization." The AI responded. "Override. Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. Authorization Solus M1138. There was a pause as the AI processed her command. As lead biologist, Mara had certain emergency authorities when it came to biological threats, a safeguard built into the system for exactly this kind of scenario. Override accepted. Testing Chamber 3 sealed under Omega classification. Access restricted to Dr. Mara Solis. Mara removed her containment suit in the airlock, following decontamination procedures with meticulous care. She had made her decision. She would investigate this threat on her own, develop a countermeasure if possible, and only wake the command crew if absolutely necessary. She was now the only thing standing between the mission and potential disaster, and the only one carrying a secret that could doom them all. The days blurred together as Mara worked tirelessly to understand the X-Eden bacteria. She slept in short bursts, often at her workstation, surrounded by data screens and simulation results. The ship's AI monitored her vital signs and occasionally reminded her to eat or rest, but otherwise did not interfere with her self-imposed mission. Her research revealed troubling facts. The bacteria appeared engineered, its genetic structure too precise to be natural. It had properties that allowed it to lie dormant for extended periods before activating in response to specific environmental triggers. Most concerning was its ability to rewrite genetic information in host cells, a feature that could prove devastating if it infected human tissue. "Odyssey, run Simulation Alpha 7 again," Mara instructed, rubbing her tired eyes. The screen in front of her displayed a virtual model of the bacteria interacting with human cells. The result was always the same: cellular degradation, followed by a cascade of system failures that would ultimately lead to death. "Simulation complete," the AI announced. "Results consistent with previous iterations. Host organism survival probability 0.02%. Mara cursed under her breath. She was getting nowhere. Without more resources and possibly other specialists, she might never find a solution. But waking others would mean explaining the situation, revealing that she had concealed a catastrophic threat for weeks. Her moment of self-doubt was interrupted by a ship-wide announcement. "Attention! Automated maintenance cycle initiating in Cryobay 3. Maintenance personnel access authorized for standard duration of 8 hours. Mara straightened. The maintenance cycles were a regular part of the ship's operations, robots and automated systems checking the cryopods, ensuring that the sleeping colonists remained stable. But occasionally, when more complex maintenance was required, one of the engineering crew would be temporarily awakened. This could be an opportunity or a complication. She made her way to Cryobay 3, arriving just as one of the cryopods was completing its reanimation sequence. The pod's cover slid open, revealing a man in his mid-30s, dark hair cropped short, his expression disoriented as consciousness returned. "Good morning," Mara said, approaching as he sat up slowly. "I'm Dr. Mara Solis, Biology Division. Welcome back to the land of the living, temporarily at least." The man rubbed his face, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the light. "Jackson Lee, Engineering," he responded, his voice rough from disuse. "How far are we?" 50 years in, give or take a few months," Mara said. "About a year from arrival." Jackson nodded, processing this information as he carefully disconnected himself from the pod's monitoring systems. "And you're awake because—" "Propulsion system malfunction a few weeks ago. I'm stuck awake until the system verification's complete." "Lucky you," he said with a hint of irony, swinging his legs over the side of the pod. "I get to check the cryobay refrigeration systems and then go right back to sleep." He paused, studying her face. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Mara shrugged. "There's always work to do. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a shuttle," he said, stretching. "But the system says I'm fine. Just need to get my legs back." Mara watched as he stood carefully, testing his balance. Jackson Lee was not what she had expected. Most of the engineering crew she had interacted with before launch had been all business, focused entirely on their systems and protocols. Jackson seemed more human. "The maintenance logs are in Engineering Bay 2, she offered. "I can show you there, if you like. It's easy to get disoriented after cryosleep." Jackson gave her a grateful smile. "I'd appreciate that. Not looking forward to getting lost in this maze while my brain is still defrosting." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Mara found herself speaking more than she had in weeks. The simple presence of another conscious human was a balm after so much isolation. Jackson was easy to talk to, asking questions about her work and sharing anecdotes about the engineering challenges they had faced before launch. For a brief time, she allowed herself to forget about the threat growing in Testing Chamber 3. When they reached Engineering Bay 2, Jackson went straight to work, his movements becoming more fluid as his body fully awakened. Mara watched as he reviewed system logs and accessed maintenance protocols, impressed by his efficiency. "So you've been alone for 3 weeks?" he asked as he worked. "That must be strange." "It's quiet," Mara admitted. "Sometimes too quiet. I find myself talking to the AI just to hear another voice." Jackson nodded. "I did a 6-month solo rotation on Europa Station before joining this mission. Isolation does strange things to the mind." He paused, looking up from his console. "If you need someone to talk to, someone who'll answer with more than programmed responses, I'm here for the next 8 hours. Mara felt a sudden urge to tell him everything about the bacteria, her fears, the terrible weight of her secret. But she held back. She barely knew this man, and involving him would only spread the burden without necessarily bringing a solution. "I appreciate that," she said instead. "It would be nice to have dinner with someone who isn't myself for a change." "It's a date," Jackson said with a smile. "Or as much of a date as you can have on a ship full of sleeping people. Let me finish these diagnostics, and I'll meet you in the mess hall in 2 hours?" "I'll be there," Mara replied, finding herself smiling for the first time in weeks. As she left Engineering Bay 2, her smile faded. For a few moments, she had allowed herself to feel normal, to connect with another person without the shadow of her secret hanging over them. But reality couldn't be avoided forever. The bacteria were still there, still a threat, and she was no closer to a solution. Yet, somehow, The prospect of sharing a meal with Jackson Lee made the burden seem slightly lighter. Dinner with Jackson proved to be exactly what Mara needed. They sat in the otherwise empty mess hall, eating reconstituted meals that neither of them paid much attention to, too engaged in conversation. Jackson told her about his life before the mission, growing up in the overcrowded arcologies of New Seattle, finding his escape in machines and engineering problems. He had a way of telling stories that made Mara laugh despite herself, his hands gesturing expressively as he described mishaps and triumphs. So there I was, floating outside Europa Station with a malfunctioning thruster pack, watching my oxygen level tick down, he said, and all I could think was, at least the view is spectacular. Mara smiled. How did you get out of that one? Improvised a pressure valve from my emergency kit, not exactly by the manual, but it got me back to the airlock with about 3 minutes of oxygen to spare. He shrugged. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and take risks. His words hung in the air between them, taking on a meaning he couldn't possibly understand. Mara had been taking a risk every day since discovering the bacteria, gambling with the lives of everyone on board. What about you? Jackson asked, interrupting her thoughts. What brought you to this mission? Mara considered the question. Opportunity, I suppose. The chance to help build something entirely new. She traced patterns on the tabletop with her finger. Earth was becoming difficult. Resources stretched too thin. Politics too divisive. This mission represented hope, a fresh start with the best of what humanity has to offer. And now you're the only one awake to appreciate it. Jackson said, Must make you feel like you're carrying the whole mission on your shoulders. His words hit closer to home than he could know. Mara looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Sometimes, she admitted softly. Jackson reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The contact startled her. After weeks alone, the simple touch of another person felt electric. Whatever it is, he said, his voice gentle, you don't have to carry it alone. For a moment, Mara almost broke, almost told him everything. But the moment passed, and she carefully withdrew her hand. Thank you, she said, but some burdens come with the job. Jackson studied her face, clearly sensing there was more she wasn't saying. To her relief, he didn't press the issue. Well, my job right now is to finish the refrigeration system maintenance, he said, standing up. Care to join me? I could use an extra pair of hands, and it might be more interesting than staring at the walls of your lab. Mara hesitated. She should return to her research. Every moment away from it was a moment wasted. But the prospect of spending more time with Jackson was tempting. And maybe a break would give her fresh perspective. Lead the way, she said, following him out of the mess hall. The refrigeration systems for the cryobays were massive, a complex network of machinery that maintained the precise conditions needed to keep 10,000 people in suspended animation. Jackson moved through the systems with confidence, explaining the various components as he worked. These are the primary coolant regulators, he said, gesturing to a bank of cylindrical tanks. They maintain the cryofluid temperature within 0.001 degrees of optimal. Any variation beyond that could cause cellular damage to the sleepers. Mara assisted as best she could, handing him tools and helping to calibrate sensors. As they worked, a thought began to form in her mind. The cryobays had the most sophisticated containment and isolation systems on the ship, necessary to protect the vulnerable sleepers from any environmental threats. Jackson, she said carefully, hypothetically speaking, if there was a biological contaminant on the ship, how vulnerable would the cryopods be? He glanced at her, eyebrows raised. Hypothetically? The pods are designed to be virtually impenetrable to biological contaminants. Each has its own filtered air supply and multiple containment layers. He returned to his calibration. But it would depend on the nature of the contaminant. Why do you ask? Just professional curiosity, Mara said, trying to sound casual. As a biologist, I'm always concerned about potential contamination risks. Jackson didn't look entirely convinced by her explanation, but he continued. Well, the most vulnerable point would be during maintenance cycles when the pods need to interface with ship systems. There are safeguards, of course, but nothing is ever completely foolproof. This information both relieved and concerned Mara. The sleepers might be safe for now, but any contamination of the ship's central systems could eventually reach them during maintenance cycles. She needed to contain the bacteria before that happened. Is there a way to access the security footage for the labs? She asked, changing the subject slightly. I'm trying to track down some anomalous readings in my data, and I want to see if anyone accessed the equipment before the launch. Jackson paused his work, giving her a curious look. There should be. The ship maintains comprehensive security logs for all restricted areas. I can help you access them after we finish here, if you'd like. That would be helpful, Mara said, feeling a twinge of guilt for not being entirely truthful with him. But she needed answers, and the security footage might provide clues about how the bacteria had been introduced. 3 hours later, they sat together in a small security monitoring station adjacent to the bridge. Jackson's fingers moved quickly over the control panel, navigating through the ship's security systems. The records go all the way back to construction, he explained, though a lot of the older footage is compressed and lower quality to save storage space. He looked at her. What time period are you interested in? The final weeks before launch, Mara said. Specifically, access to testing chamber 3 in the biology labs. Jackson nodded and input the parameters. The screen filled with a list of access records, each with a corresponding video file. There you go. You can view any of these records by selecting them. Mara scanned the list, looking for anything unusual. Most of the entries were expected: her own access, visits from her lab assistants, final inspections by security personnel. Nothing that immediately stood out as suspicious. Can you filter for access during non-standard hours? She asked. Jackson adjusted the search parameters, and the list shortened considerably. One entry caught Mara's attention. Access at 003117 hours, just 3 days before launch. Authorized by Security Chief Vasquez. This one, she said, pointing. Can you bring up the video? The footage was grainy, the lighting dim as the lab operated on night cycle. A figure in a standard crew uniform entered the testing chamber, their face partially obscured by a cap. They moved with purpose, directly to the genomic sequencing equipment, where they appeared to insert something into one of the test chambers. The entire process took less than 5 minutes before they exited again. Can you enhance the image? Mara asked, her heart racing. I can't make out their face. Jackson tried several enhancement algorithms, but the quality of the compressed footage was too poor for clear identification. Sorry, he said. This is the best I can do. But we could cross-reference the security access with personnel records to see who used Vasquez's authorization. Before Mara could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. Red warning lights pulsed along the corridors. Warning, the ship's AI announced. Unauthorized access to security systems detected. Security protocols activated. Jackson looked at Mara, alarm evident in his eyes. That's not supposed to happen. We have legitimate access. Odyssey, Mara called out. This is Dr. Solis. Override security alert. Authorization Solis M1138. Unable to comply, the AI responded. Security Protocol Delta 7 initiated. Command authorization required. Jackson was already moving, his fingers flying over the console. Something's wrong with the system. It's reading our access as a security breach. He looked up at Mara, his expression grim. This is going to wake Captain Reyes. Mara felt the blood drain from her face. Elias Reyes, the ship's commander, was a former military officer known for his strict adherence to protocol. If he was awakened due to a security alert, and then discovered she had been keeping the bacterial contamination secret, the consequences would be severe. "Can you stop it?" she asked urgently. "I'm trying," Jackson said, still working at the console, "but the wake-up sequence for the command pod has already initiated. We have maybe 10 minutes before the captain is fully conscious." Mara's mind raced. She had 10 minutes to decide, continue hiding the truth and somehow explain away the security alert, or come clean about everything and face the consequences. "Jackson," she said, her decision made, "there's something I need to tell you, something I discovered in testing chamber 3. As quickly and clearly as she could, Mara explained about the bacterial contamination, her research, and her decision to keep it secret. Jackson listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each revelation. "You should have reported this immediately," he said when she finished. "This is exactly the kind of threat the command structure needs to know about." "And risk aborting the entire mission?" Mara countered. 10,000 people waking up to find they're stranded in deep space with no way home and possibly no safe destination. I couldn't make that call without trying to find a solution first. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "I understand why you did it, but Captain Reyes won't see it that way. He'll see a breach of protocol that put the entire ship at risk." "Then help me," Mara pleaded. "Help me explain it to him in a way that doesn't end with the mission being aborted and both of us in the brig." Before Jackson could respond, the door to the security station slid open. Captain Elias Reyes stood in the doorway, his tall frame still imposing despite the disorientation of recent cryosleep. His gray eyes swept over them, taking in the situation with military precision. "Dr. Solis," he said, his voice clipped. "Engineer Lee, would one of you care to explain why I've been awakened?" Mara exchanged a glance with Jackson, then stepped forward. There was no going back now. "Captain, we have a situation that requires your attention," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "A biological contaminant has been detected in the genomic testing chambers. I've been researching it since my awakening 3 weeks ago." Reyes's expression hardened. "And you're only reporting this now, after triggering a security alert accessing restricted files?" He moved to the console, reviewing the information displayed there. "This is a serious breach of protocol. Doctor, why wasn't this reported immediately upon discovery?" Mara took a deep breath. "Because I feared it might lead to a mission abort decision. Sir, the bacteria appears engineered to affect genetic material. Its potential impact on the colonists could be catastrophic. But I believed I might find a containment solution before involving command." "That wasn't your decision to make," Reyes said sharply. "Withholding information of this nature is grounds for severe disciplinary action." He turned to Jackson. "And your involvement, Engineer Lee?" "I was only awakened for routine maintenance, sir," Jackson explained. "Dr. Solis just informed me of the situation moments before your arrival." Reyes studied them both, his expression unreadable. "I want to see this contaminant. Now." Mara led them to the biology labs. Her stomach knotted with anxiety. The sealed testing chamber 3 looked innocuous enough from the outside, but the danger it contained could threaten everything they had worked for. "Odyssey, display microscopic imaging from testing chamber 3 Maximum magnification. Mara instructed. The wall screen activated, showing the bacteria colonies thriving in their contained environment. Mara explained her findings to Reyes, detailing the bacteria's unusual properties and potential dangers. "And you believe this was deliberately introduced?" Reyes asked, studying the screen intently. "The security footage suggests so," Mara confirmed. "Though we couldn't identify the individual responsible." Reyes was silent for a long moment, his military discipline evident in his rigid posture. "We need to convene an emergency response team," he said finally. "This situation requires additional expertise. Odyssey, initiate wake-up sequences for Medical Officer Patel and Security Chief Vasquez." "Yes, Captain," the AI responded, initiating wake-up sequences. Mara felt a wave of relief mixed with apprehension. The secret was out now, for better or worse. Other people would be brought into the situation, people who might have fresh perspectives or critical information. Until they're awake and briefed, both of you will continue investigating. Reyes ordered. "Dr. Solis, focus on containment protocols and potential countermeasures. Engineer Lee, I want you to continue examining the security footage. Find out who introduced this contaminant and how." "Yes, sir." They responded in unison. As Reyes turned to leave, Mara called after him. "Captain, what about the mission? If we can't neutralize this threat?" Reyes paused in the doorway, his shoulders tense. "One step at a time. Doctor, we don't abort until all other options are exhausted." He fixed her with a stern gaze. "But understand this. If you ever withhold critical information again, I'll have you in stasis, lockdown for the remainder of the journey. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Mara replied, chastened but somewhat relieved. At least Reyes wasn't immediately jumping to the worst-case scenario. After the captain left, Jackson turned to Mara. "Well, that could have gone worse. He still might change his mind once Patel and Vasquez are awake." Mara said, "Especially if we can't make progress on a solution." Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture surprisingly comforting. "Then we'd better make progress. Show me everything you've learned about this bacteria so far. 2 minds are better than 1, right?" For the first time since discovering the contamination, Mara felt a small spark of hope. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The next 12 hours were a blur of activity as Mara and Jackson worked alongside the newly awakened Dr. Amara Patel and Security Chief Sofia Vasquez. The small team operated out of the main laboratory, converting it into an impromptu command center for their investigation. Dr. Patel, a stern woman with decades of medical experience, had taken charge of analyzing the potential impact on human physiology. She was not pleased about Mara's decision to keep the contamination secret, but her professional focus quickly overrode her personal disapproval. "The bacteria's interaction with human cellular structure is concerning," Patel reported. "Examining simulation results, it appears designed to target specific genetic sequences common in the colonist population." "Meaning what, exactly?" Reyes asked, his arms crossed as he stood at the head of the laboratory table. "Meaning this wasn't a random contamination," Patel explained. "Someone engineered this bacteria to affect our specific colonist group. It wouldn't have the same impact on just any human population." The implication hung heavy in the air. This wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. Security Chief Vasquez, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, had been furious to discover her security credentials had been used to access the testing chamber. She had been poring over personnel files and security logs since her awakening, searching for any clue to the saboteur's identity. "The security footage is a dead end," she announced. frustration evident in her voice. Whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid clear identification. And the list of personnel with the technical knowledge to create this bacteria and the access to plant it is too long to be immediately useful. Focus on opportunity and motive. Reyes suggested, who among the science team had both the access and a potential reason to sabotage the mission? Mara felt uncomfortable as Vasquez's gaze lingered on her. As lead biologist with specialized knowledge of genetic engineering, she was undoubtedly on the chief's list of suspects, especially given her decision to keep the contamination secret. "I've been reviewing the bacterial structure," Jackson said, drawing attention away from Mara. He had proven surprisingly knowledgeable about biological systems for an engineer. "There's something unusual about its dormancy mechanism. It appears designed to activate in response to a specific environmental trigger." "What kind of trigger?" Mara asked, moving to examine his findings. "Temperature fluctuation," Jackson explained. "The bacteria remains dormant until exposed to a very specific warming pattern, the kind that would occur during the final approach to Eden 3 when the ship's systems begin preparing for landing." Mara felt a chill run through her. "That's why it activated when I was awakened. The propulsion malfunction caused temperature variations in adjacent systems, including the testing chambers. So whoever did this wanted the bacteria to remain dormant until we reached Eden 3, Reyes concluded. "Maximum damage at the worst possible time." But why?" Patel asked. "What would anyone gain from sabotaging the mission at that point?" Before anyone could speculate further, the ship's AI interrupted with an urgent announcement. "Warning, anomalous activity detected in Cryobay 2, temperature fluctuations exceeding safety parameters." Reyes straightened immediately. "Odyssey, source of fluctuations? Unknown. Captain, environmental controls in Cryobay 2 are experiencing unexpected command inputs." Jackson was already moving toward the door. The bacteria, if it's reached the environmental systems controlling the cryobays, he didn't need to finish the thought. If the bacteria had somehow contaminated the ship's environmental control systems, it could cause the temperature fluctuations necessary to trigger its own activation throughout the ship, including in the cryopods themselves. "Initiate emergency isolation protocol for Cryobay 2, Reyes ordered. "Odyssey, seal all access points and vent the atmospheric content to space." Unable to comply, "Captain," the AI responded. "Environmental control overrides are in effect. Manual intervention required." Reyes cursed under his breath. "Vasquez, with me, will secure Cryobay 2 manually. Patel, prepare emergency medical protocols in case we need to evacuate colonists from affected pods. Solis, Lee, find a way to neutralize this thing before it spreads further." As Reyes and Vasquez rushed toward Cryobay 2, Mara turned to Jackson. "How could the bacteria have reached the environmental systems? The testing chambers are completely isolated from ship's operations." Jackson's expression was grim. "Someone must have helped it along. The sabotage isn't over." The realization struck Mara like a physical blow. The saboteur wasn't just some long-gone perpetrator who had planted the bacteria before launch. They were active now, aboard the ship, continuing their plan. "We need to check the other cryobays," she said urgently. "If someone is manually spreading the contamination—" "Dr. Patel can handle that," Jackson said, pulling Mara toward the lab's primary research station. "We need to focus on what we do best, finding a way to neutralize this bacteria before it's too late." Mara nodded, pushing aside her fear to focus on the problem at hand. She had spent weeks studying the bacteria's structure and behavior. There had to be a vulnerability she could exploit. "Its accelerated mutation rate," she said suddenly. "That's both its strength and its weakness. If we could introduce a competing organism, something that would trigger its mutation response, but lead it down an evolutionary dead end. Jackson caught on immediately. A genetic trap, something that looks like viable genetic material, but causes the bacteria to mutate itself into non-viability. Exactly, Mara said, already pulling up the genetic sequencing data. We need to design a sequence that the bacteria will try to incorporate, but which will disrupt its fundamental structure. They worked feverishly, building on Mara's weeks of research and Jackson's surprisingly insightful suggestions. As they refined their approach, the ship around them descended into crisis. Reyes's voice came through the communication system, tense with urgency. Solis, Lee, we have a situation. The temperature fluctuations have triggered emergency wake-up protocols in Cryobay 2. We have colonists beginning to emerge from cryosleep prematurely. Mara felt her heart sink. Premature awakening was dangerous under the best circumstances. The body needed a carefully controlled reanimation sequence to avoid shock and system failure. Under these conditions, with potential bacterial contamination, it could be catastrophic. How many? She asked. 37 pods affected so far, Reyes reported. Patel is trying to stabilize them, but we need that countermeasure now. And there's more. Vasquez found evidence of manual tampering with the environmental controls. Someone deliberately initiated the temperature fluctuations. We're close, Jackson assured him. Give us 15 minutes. As soon as the communication ended, Jackson turned to Mara. We don't have 15 minutes. We need to deploy what we have now, even if it's not perfect. But if it doesn't work, Mara began. If we wait for perfection, we'll lose everyone in Cryobay 2. Jackson cut her off. Sometimes good enough has to be good enough. Mara knew he was right. They had designed a genetic sequence that, in theory, would cause the bacteria to mutate into harmless structures. It hadn't been tested beyond simulations, but they were out of time. We'll need to introduce it through the air circulation system. She said, That's the fastest way to reach all affected areas. I can modify the circulation controls to create a dispersal pattern, Jackson said, already moving toward the environmental system access panel. But we'll need to synthesize enough of the sequence first. Mara began the synthesis process, pushing the equipment to its limits. As she worked, a thought nagged at her. Jackson had been remarkably helpful, knowledgeable about biological systems, security protocols, and ship's operations well beyond what a typical maintenance engineer should know. Jackson, she said carefully as they waited for the synthesis to complete. How do you know so much about biological systems? That's not standard knowledge for engineering personnel. He hesitated, his back to her as he worked on the circulation controls. I've always had diverse interests. Biology, genetics. I find it all fascinating. Fascinating enough to understand genetic engineering techniques that most specialized biologists struggle with? Mara pressed, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. Or to know exactly how to access security footage that should be restricted? Jackson turned to face her, his expression unreadable. What are you asking, Mara? I'm asking who you really are, she said, her hand moving slowly toward the emergency alarm button on the lab console. Because you're not just a maintenance engineer, are you? For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Jackson sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. No, he admitted. I'm not just an engineer. I'm also mission council oversight. I was planted on the ship to monitor for exactly this kind of situation, sabotage that could threaten the entire mission. Mara stared at him, processing this revelation. You're a spy. I prefer security contingency, Jackson said with a hint of his usual humor, though his eyes remained serious. The council had intelligence suggesting a potential threat to the mission. I was inserted as a failsafe, to be awakened periodically to check for signs of sabotage. "And you didn't think to mention this when I told you about the bacteria?" Mara demanded, anger flaring through her shock. "I needed to assess the situation first," Jackson explained. "Determine if you were involved or just an unfortunate discoverer. By the time I was confident you weren't the saboteur, Reyes was awake and things were moving too quickly." The synthesis machine beeped, indicating completion. Mara glanced at it, then back at Jackson. "So who is the saboteur?" she asked. "Do you know?" "I have suspicions," Jackson said grimly. "But we need to deploy this countermeasure first. We can sort out the rest afterward." Mara wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but he was right. The bacterial countermeasure took priority. She removed the synthesized sequence from the machine and loaded it into the dispersal canister Jackson had prepared. "This connects directly to the ventilation system?" she asked, professional focus overriding her personal feelings for the moment. "Yes, once activated, it will disperse through all connected systems within minutes." As they worked to connect the canister to the ventilation access point, the ship's communication system crackled to life again. "This is Reyes. Situation escalating in Cryobay 2. Some awakened colonists showing signs of infection. Patel is containing them, but we're losing control of the situation. Vasquez is pursuing a suspect toward Engineering Bay 1. Solis, Lee, status report. Countermeasure ready for deployment. Captain." Jackson responded, "Connecting to ventilation system now." "Deploy immediately," Reyes ordered. "Then get to Engineering Bay 1. Vasquez may need backup." The communication cut off, leaving Mara and Jackson in tense silence as they completed the final connections. "Ready?" Jackson asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch. Mara nodded. "Do it." Jackson flipped the switch, and the canister hummed to life, feeding its contents into the ship's ventilation system. A status indicator on the canister began to track dispersal percentage. "It'll take about 10 minutes for complete circulation," Jackson said. "We should get to Engineering Bay 1. They moved quickly through the ship's corridors, passing emergency lights flashing in rhythmic warning patterns. As they approached Engineering Bay 1, they heard the sounds of conflict, shouting, and the distinctive discharge of a security stun weapon. Jackson motioned for Mara to stay back as he approached the entrance cautiously. Peering around the doorframe, he quickly assessed the situation before pulling back. "Vasquez is down," he whispered. "Someone stunned her. I can see movement near the main power distribution panel." Mara's mind raced. The main power distribution panel controlled energy flow to all ship systems, including the cryobays. If someone were to disrupt power to the cryopods while the bacteria was active— "We need to stop them," she said urgently. Jackson nodded, reaching into his utility belt and producing a small stun device of his own. "Stay behind me," he instructed. They entered Engineering Bay 1 cautiously. Security Chief Vasquez lay unconscious near the entrance, her weapon missing. The bay was large, filled with humming machinery and control panels. Someone could easily hide among the equipment. Jackson moved forward slowly, the stun device held ready. Mara followed, her eyes scanning for any movement. They had nearly reached the main power distribution panel when a figure stepped out from behind a bank of cooling systems. Dr. Patel stood before them, Vasquez's weapon in her hand, pointed directly at them. "That's far enough," she said, her voice eerily calm. Mara stared in disbelief. "Dr. Patel, you're the saboteur?" "Saboteur is such an ugly word," Patel replied. "I prefer course corrector. This mission was a mistake from the beginning, a waste of resources that could have been used to save Earth rather than abandon it." "So you introduced the bacteria?" Jackson said, his stun device still raised. Designed it to activate when we reached Eden 3. Patel nodded. It was elegant. Really. The colonists would have awakened to find their new world uninhabitable due to genetic incompatibility. They would have had no choice but to return to Earth, bringing with them all the resources and technology that had been selfishly allocated to this mission. Except the ship doesn't have enough fuel for a return journey, Mara pointed out. You would have stranded 10,000 people in space. Acceptable losses compared to the billions suffering on Earth, Patel said thoughtfully. But your premature awakening complicated things. I had to accelerate the plan when I realized you were investigating the contamination. By manually triggering the temperature fluctuations in Cryobay 2, Jackson concluded. A necessary diversion, Patel confirmed. But you've been surprisingly resourceful. That countermeasure you've deployed might actually work, temporarily. So I'm forced to take more direct action. She gestured toward the power distribution panel behind her. One significant power surge to the cryobase systems will finish what the bacteria started. The resulting cascade failure will be catastrophic. Mara took a step forward. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Send a message back to Earth. Request additional resources. It's too late for half measures, Patel said, her finger tightening on the trigger of the stun weapon. This mission dies here. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion. Jackson lunged forward, firing his stun device at Patel just as she discharged her own weapon. The two energy bursts crossed in the air between them. Jackson struck Patel in the shoulder, causing her to stagger backward. Patel's went wide, hitting a control panel instead of Jackson. Alarms blared immediately as the damaged control panel sparked and smoked. Warning, the ship's AI announced. Critical system failure detected in thermal regulation controls. Cryobay temperature rising beyond safe parameters. Patel, though injured, used the distraction to reach for the power distribution panel. Jackson recovered quickly and tackled her before she could reach it, both of them crashing to the floor in a struggle for control. Mara, Jackson shouted. The thermal regulators. You need to reset them manually. Mara rushed to the damaged control panel, trying to make sense of the flashing warnings and error messages. The thermal regulation system was in cascade failure, temperatures in all cryobays rising rapidly. If they reached critical levels, the colonists would begin waking in an uncontrolled process, right as the bacteria might be reaching peak virulence. Behind her, the struggle between Jackson and Patel continued. A crash and grunt of pain told her someone had taken a hard hit, but she couldn't afford to look back. The lives of 10,000 colonists depended on her stabilizing the thermal system. Odyssey, she called out. Emergency protocol override. Isolate thermal regulation systems and initiate backup cooling procedures. Unable to comply, the AI responded. Manual override required at primary cooling junction. Mara's heart sank. The primary cooling junction was located between the outer hull and the cryobays, a maintenance area that required passing through a decompression chamber and specialized equipment to access. Jackson, she called, turning to see him finally subduing Patel with restraints. We need to get to the primary cooling junction. The AI can't reset it remotely. Jackson looked up, his face grim. That's in Maintenance Sector 7, between the hull plates. It'll take at least 15 minutes to reach it with proper preparation. Warning, the AI interjected. Critical temperature threshold in Cryobay 1 will be reached in 8 minutes. Catastrophic system failure imminent. We don't have 15 minutes, Mara said, desperation creeping into her voice. Jackson finished securing Patel to a structural support beam and moved to Mara's side, examining the control panel. There's another way, he said after a moment. A maintenance access shaft runs directly above this section. It would put you within 50 meters of the cooling junction, but it's narrow and not designed for human passage. "I'll take it," Mara said without hesitation. Jackson's expression was torn. "It's dangerous. Mara, the shaft isn't pressurized or temperature controlled, and at the end, you'd still need to access the junction through an emergency hatch that could be difficult to operate from inside." "What's the alternative?" Mara asked. "We can't let 10,000 people die." After a brief hesitation, Jackson nodded. "I'll guide you through it from here. There's an access panel in the ceiling near the auxiliary control station." Mara moved quickly to the indicated location. Finding the small panel Jackson had described, it opened to reveal a narrow shaft barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. "Once you're in, crawl straight for about 30 meters, Jackson instructed, handing her a small toolkit and emergency beacon from his utility belt. "Then there's a junction. Take the right path for another 20 meters. The cooling junction access will be below you, a circular hatch with red markings." Mara took the equipment and prepared to climb into the shaft. Before she could, Jackson caught her arm. "The countermeasure," he said. "Is it working? Can you tell?" Mara realized she hadn't checked the bacterial response to their genetic trap. She quickly accessed a nearby terminal, bringing up the lab monitoring systems. "It's working," she confirmed, relief washing through her as she saw the bacteria colonies beginning to destabilize in the test chambers. "The infection should be neutralized within the hour. Then we just need to keep everyone alive until then," Jackson said. He hesitated, then quickly pressed his lips to hers in a brief, urgent kiss. "Be careful." Startled but somehow not surprised by the gesture, Mara nodded. "Keep Patel secured, and tell Reyes what's happening." With that, she hoisted herself into the narrow maintenance shaft and began crawling forward into the darkness. The shaft was even more confined than it had appeared from below. Mara moved on her elbows and knees, the metal walls pressing in on all sides. The only light came from emergency strips that glowed dimly along the bottom edge of the shaft, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. "Warning," the ship's AI announced, its voice reaching her faintly through the shaft walls. 6 minutes until critical temperature threshold in Cryo Bay 1. Mara increased her pace, ignoring the pain as her elbows and knees scraped against the unforgiving metal. The air grew noticeably cooler as she approached the ship's outer sections, her breath beginning to fog in front of her. When she reached the junction Jackson had described, she paused only long enough to orient herself before taking the right path. This section was even narrower, forcing her to wriggle forward on her stomach. 4 minutes until critical temperature threshold. The AI updated. Mara finally reached the location of the cooling junction access. Below her, just as Jackson had described, was a circular hatch with red warning markings. A small control panel beside it indicated it was locked in maintenance mode. "Jackson," she called, hoping the ship's communication system would pick up her voice. "I'm at the access hatch. It's locked in maintenance mode." There was a pause before his voice responded, tinny and distant. "You'll need to override it manually. There should be a physical release lever behind the control panel." Mara examined the panel, finding a small access point at its edge, using one of the tools from the kit Jackson had given her. She pried the panel open, revealing a complex array of circuitry and mechanical components. "I see it," she confirmed, identifying the emergency release lever Jackson had mentioned. "But it's frozen in place. I think the temperature drop affected the mechanism." "Hit it with the handle of the multi-tool," Jackson suggested. "Sometimes brute force works when finesse doesn't." Under different circumstances, Mara might have laughed at the engineer's practical advice. Instead, she did as he suggested, striking the frozen lever with the tool's handle. After several attempts, the lever gave way with a crack, releasing the hatch lock. The hatch swung open beneath her, revealing the cooling junction below. A blast of frigid air rushed up through the opening, carrying the distinct scent of coolant and machinery. 2 minutes until critical threshold, the AI warned. Mara lowered herself through the hatch, dropping the last meter onto the maintenance platform surrounding the cooling junction. The massive machinery hummed and whirred around her, its normal operational rhythm clearly disrupted by the cascade failure. "I'm at the junction," she reported. "What do I need to do?" "There should be a manual reset sequence," Jackson's voice replied, more distorted now. 3 levers that need to be pulled in sequence. Then a main cutoff valve that needs to be closed and reopened. Mara located the control station for the cooling junction. The 3 levers Jackson had described were clearly marked with numbered tags, but the main cutoff valve was located on the far side of the junction, requiring her to climb over several large coolant pipes to reach it. 1 minute until critical threshold, the AI announced, its voice echoing through the junction chamber. Mara moved quickly, pulling the 3 levers in sequence as Jackson had instructed. Each made a satisfying clunk as it reset to its proper position. Then she climbed carefully over the coolant pipes, reaching for the main cutoff valve. It was larger than she had expected, and incredibly stiff. Mara struggled to turn it, her hands going numb in the frigid air of the junction chamber. 30 seconds until critical threshold, the AI warned, desperation lending her strength. Mara finally managed to turn the valve to the closed position. A loud hiss of pressure release sounded throughout the chamber as the coolant flow temporarily stopped. "Now reopen it," Jackson's voice urged, barely audible through the noise of the machinery. Mara gripped the valve again, turning it in the opposite direction. It moved more easily this time, reopening the coolant flow. The machinery around her stuttered, then began to hum in a more regular pattern. "Temperature stabilizing in Cryo Bay 1, the AI announced after a tense moment. Critical threshold averted, returning to normal operational parameters. Relief flooded through Mara, so intense that her knees nearly buckled. She had done it, prevented the temperature spike that would have awakened the colonists to face the bacterial threat. "Mara, can you hear me?" Jackson's voice came through clearer now as the ship's systems normalized. "Did it work?" "It worked," she confirmed, her voice shaking slightly from cold and adrenaline. "The cooling system is reset. Temperature levels are stabilizing." "Captain Reyes has secured Cryo Bay 2, Jackson reported. "The awakened colonists are being treated in medical. Patel is in custody. And the bacterial countermeasure is showing positive results throughout the ship. We did it. Mara, we saved the mission." Mara leaned against the cooling junction, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. They had done it, faced seemingly impossible odds, and prevailed. The mission would continue. The colonists would sleep safely until they reached Eden 3, and the sabotage had been thwarted. But at what cost? Trust had been broken. Security had been compromised. And she had formed connections she hadn't expected, both with Jackson and with the mission itself. "I'm coming back," she said, softly. "We still have a lot to talk about." The journey back through the maintenance shaft seemed longer than the journey in, her body protesting every movement after the strain of the past hours. By the time she emerged into Engineering Bay 1, Captain Reyes had arrived with a security team. Dr. Patel was being escorted away in restraints, her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. Vasquez had regained consciousness and was receiving medical attention from one of the emergency response team members. And Jackson stood waiting for Mara, relief evident in his eyes as she climbed down from the access panel. Dr. Solis. Captain Reyes acknowledged her with a nod that contained more respect than she had seen from him previously. Well done. Thank you, sir, Mara replied, too tired to say more. We have the situation under control. Reyes continued. The bacterial contamination is being neutralized by your countermeasure. The awakened colonists are stable and will be returned to cryosleep once we're certain they're free of infection. And Dr. Patel will be placed in secure stasis until we reach Eden 3, where she'll face judgment for her actions. What about the mission? Mara asked. Will we continue as planned? The mission council will be informed of the incident, Reyes said. But given that the threat has been contained and the saboteur identified, I see no reason to recommend mission abort. We'll proceed to Eden 3 as scheduled. Mara felt the weight of responsibility lifting slightly from her shoulders. The mission would continue. The 10,000 colonists would have their chance at a new beginning. You and Engineer Lee should get some rest. Reyes added, You've both earned it. We'll reconvene in 12 hours to discuss next steps. As Reyes moved away to oversee the cleanup operations, Jackson approached Mara. His expression was complicated, part relief, part sadness. So, Mara said, a spy for the mission council. Jackson winced slightly. Security contingency, he corrected. And for what it's worth, I wasn't lying about enjoying your company. That part was real. Mara studied his face, searching for the truth. Despite everything, she believed him. Their connection had been genuine, even if his presence on the ship had been part of a hidden agenda. What happens now? She asked. Do you go back into cryosleep until the next scheduled check? Jackson hesitated. That was the original plan. But after everything that's happened, Captain Reyes has requested that I remain awake for the remainder of the journey to help ensure the ship's security. So we'll both be awake, Mara said. The only two people conscious on a ship of sleepers, except for Reyes and Vasquez. Jackson amended. They'll be staying awake too, a small command crew to see the mission through to Eden 3. Mara considered this. It wasn't what she had expected when she'd been awakened by the propulsion malfunction weeks ago, but perhaps it was what the mission needed. A vigilant crew to protect the sleeping colonists on their journey to a new world. I think I'd like that, she said, finally. Though I'm still mad at you for not telling me who you really were. Jackson smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the crisis began. I think I can live with that. I have about a year to make it up to you. As they left Engineering Bay 1 together, Mara felt a strange mix of emotions, exhaustion and relief, sadness for what had been lost and hope for what might come. The ship around them hummed with renewed purpose, carrying its precious cargo of dreamers toward a distant world and a new beginning. The journey would continue, and Mara would no longer keep her secrets alone. 1 year later, Mara stood at the same viewing deck where her journey had begun, watching as Eden 3 grew larger in the viewport. The planet was a swirl of blues and greens, remarkably Earth-like despite being light years from humanity's birthplace. Beautiful, isn't it? Jackson said, joining her at the viewport. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, from reluctant allies to friends, and eventually to something deeper. The shared experience of being among the only people awake on the massive ship had created a bond that neither had expected, but both had come to treasure. Worth everything we went through to get here. Mara agreed. Captain Reyes approached, his uniform impeccable as always. The past year had softened some of his military rigidity, though he remained every inch the commanding officer. The first awakening sequence begins in 2 hours, he informed them. The advance team will prepare the landing site, and then we'll begin the full colonization process. The Mission Council has approved our report and recommendations. Dr. Patel will remain in stasis until judicial facilities are established on the surface. Mara nodded. The sabotage attempt had been fully documented, the bacterial contamination completely neutralized. The genetic testing chambers had been decontaminated and recertified for use in evaluating Eden-3's indigenous biology. "What about the rest of the crew?" she asked. "When will they be informed about what happened?" "On a need-to-know basis," Reyes replied. "The colonists will be told there was a minor technical issue that required a skeleton crew to remain awake. No need to start our new society with fear and suspicion." Mara wasn't entirely comfortable with the decision to withhold the full truth, but she understood the reasoning. The colonists would face enough challenges adapting to their new home without the added burden of knowing how close they had come to disaster. "The Mission Council representative wants to speak with you before the awakening begins," Reyes added, addressing Mara, "to formally rescind the disciplinary notice in your file for the initial protocol breach." "I'll be there," Mara promised. Her decision to keep the bacterial contamination secret had initially resulted in a formal reprimand. Despite her later actions to save the mission, it seemed the Council had finally recognized that her intentions, if not her methods, had been in the best interest of the mission. As Reyes departed, Jackson took her hand. "Nervous about facing all those people after a year of quiet?" "A little," Mara admitted, "but also excited. This is what we came for. After all, a new beginning." Jackson squeezed her hand. "I've been thinking about that. About new beginnings." There was something in his voice that made Mara turn to look at him fully. His expression was unusually serious. "When I was assigned to this mission as security contingency, I never expected to find this," he said, gesturing between them. "Us. It wasn't part of the plan." "The best things rarely are," Mara replied softly. "I want to continue, after we land, after the mission technically ends and we all become just colonists." Jackson's words came faster now, as though he'd been holding them back for some time. "I want to build something with you on Eden-3, something that's ours." Mara felt her heart swell with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge during their long months of crisis and vigilance. "I'd like that," she said simply. Jackson's relief was palpable. "Good. That's good." He smiled, some of his usual confidence returning. "I'm told I have pretty decent engineering skills. Might come in handy building a home." Mara laughed, the sound echoing in the otherwise empty viewing deck. "And I know a thing or two about biology. Useful on a new planet." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the ship's AI. "Attention all awakened personnel. Orbital insertion complete. Preparation for first landing party commencing. Please report to your designated stations." Reality reasserted itself. They still had jobs to do, responsibilities to fulfill. The real work of colonization was just beginning. "We should go," Mara said reluctantly. Jackson nodded, but didn't release her hand immediately. "One more thing," he said. "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not giving up. When you found the bacteria, when you discovered Patel's sabotage, when everything seemed impossible, you kept going. You saved this mission. You saved all of us." Mara shook her head. "We saved it. Together." As they left the viewing deck, Eden-3 filled the viewport behind them, a world of possibility waiting to be explored. The ship that had been their solitary home for so long would soon be filled with awakened colonists, their dreams of a new beginning about to become reality. Mara thought briefly of the challenges they had faced, the bacteria that had nearly destroyed everything, the betrayal by one of their own, the desperate measures they had taken to preserve the mission. Those experiences had changed her, had changed all of them, but they had survived, and in surviving, had earned their chance at this new world. The first colonists would awaken soon, emerging from their long sleep to the promise of Eden 3. They would not know how close they had come to disaster, would not understand the sacrifices made to protect them. But Mara would know. Jackson would know. They would carry the memory of those dark days, along with the hope for brighter ones to come. As they walked together toward the awakening chambers, Mara realized that she was no longer the colony ship's last passenger awake. Soon, she would be just one among many, part of a community, part of something larger than herself. The secret that could have doomed the mission was gone now, neutralized like the bacteria that had threatened them. In its place was knowledge, hard-won and precious, that even in the vast emptiness of space, humanity's drive to survive, to protect one another, to build something meaningful, remained their greatest strength. Eden 3 waited, and Mara, no longer alone, was ready to begin.